Okay, let's talk the curve editor. The curve editor in Nuke is available in the node graph tab, or a tab as part of the node graph. You can see I've got the curve editor and dope sheet as well down here. I'm just going to select the curve editor, and this is the curve editor. You can see at the moment there's nothing visible because we don't have any animation in our comp, and we don't have anything selected or sent to the curve editor. So we'll just show you the basic parameters of the curve editor. But to start, the vertical axis here represents the value, and the horizontal axis represents the time in frames. This yellow bar represents our current position. So you can see we're at frame 22, and that's what the bar is showing. We can click and drag this bar by clicking on the arrow at the top or the bottom, and you can see our cursor changes to a little directional arrow indicating the direction that we're going to be dragging it. And as I drag it, you can see that our timeline indicator here is also changing. So if I can also change it manually by adjusting it in the timeline. We can also navigate and zoom using the controls we're used to in Nuke. Alt and click to pan. I can Alt and middle mouse click, and I can drag diagonally, and that will give me a uniform scale. Okay. I can drag horizontally, and that will give me a horizontal scale, or I can drag vertically for a vertical scale. Okay. Let's go back to the node graph, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate this wheel to translate across the screen. So I'm going to go to my transform node, and I'm going to make sure it's selected in the properties bin, and I'm going to go up to my translate X, X being the horizontal axis and Y being the vertical axis. I'm going to right click on the X value and hit set key at frame 1. I'm going to move my slider over here to frame 50, and I'm going to change this value to 858 and hit, well, sorry, I don't need to hit set key because it's set automatically. Okay, see how I've got this blue 50 here, and we've got this blue mark at 1. So now we've got this animation. Okay, my computer's just catching up. I'll just put a region of interest around this so that it loads a bit quicker. Okay, and I'll just activate proxy as well. Okay, so now you can see we're animating from 1 to frame 50, and we're going left to right. Now I'll just limit my view to that 50 frames by hitting this button here, going 50 frames like we learned in an earlier video, and I can now play that animation, which is going to loop, as you can see. Okay, so I've got our animation set. Okay, let's say though we wanted to alter this animation another way. Well, we can use the curve editor to do that. If we go to the curve editor tab now, you can see that I have this transform 1 node. Inside the transform 1 we have the translate parameter, and under the translate parameter we have the x-axis, which is the only axis which has a keyframe. You can see here that it's now represented this value in the curve editor, and you can see that it's saying that we go from value here 858 minus 858, and if I click on this point here to positive 858. Okay, and you can see this is a linear motion. Okay, so it goes straight. Now what I can do is if I want to modify this, I'll just zoom out a bit here. I could shift it by highlighting and selecting both points, and now what I can do is I can bring my cursor over the center here to this X, and you can see the cursor changes to represent the movement that's going to happen, and if I click on this I can slide the timing left and right. So if you look at the viewer at the same time, you'll see that the two keyframes are sliding left and right. They're being offset left and right as I move. So I'll put those back to frame 1, and I can also move them vertically, and that's going to change the position. Okay, so if I wanted, this could be useful, for example, if I wanted, instead of it ending at frame 50, exactly at frame 50, I could say, okay, I want it to start at frame 10 and end at frame 60. So what I'm going to do is click, and I'm going to drag it across. So now the motion ends at frame 60, and for the first 10 frames nothing happens, and then it starts, and then it ends. Okay. I can also move it up and down to change the value at that time. So if I wanted to see how it's starting a little bit off screen, I can just move it up, and just set it to a position that I'm happy with. Okay, I'll just update this to our new length, 60. So I'm now playing frames 1 to 60. So you can see what we've got is for the first 10 frames, nothing happens, then it moves, and then it stops at frame 60. Okay. We can also scale our animation. We can do that by clicking on the outside of our box, our bounding box we have here, and you can see that our cursor changes once again, and we can then scale it in size. We can also scale it vertically. Okay, I'll just undo those two moves. You also have controls over the tangents of these two animation points. You can see when I highlight a point that this red dotted line appears. This is called a tangent, and this lets me alter the animation. Let's say instead of having the motion be static for the first 10 frames and then instantly activate and then translate and then instantly stop, let's say we want it to ramp in and ramp out. This gives us a really nice natural animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the tangent and I'm going to slide it down, okay, until it's level. Now I'm going to do the same with this one. So now what we've got is a nice even ramp in and ramp out. So you can see here that the color wheel is static for the first 10 frames, but instead of just getting to this point and then starting instantly and then just shooting off, you can see we've made it ramp on and ramp off. This means that it'll start off a bit slower and slow down a bit slower, just like a car would in real life. It doesn't start and then instantly activate. So let's play this and see what we've done. Okay, so you can see how this could be quite powerful for quickly altering animations where you would normally have to put in lots of values to get this to work. Using the tangents like this is very, very useful. What we can also do is we can draw keyframes, which is a really good feature. Let's just increase our region of interest a bit here. Okay, so let's say we want to make this bounce. Well, one way we could do it is we could set our keyframe here. We could say at frame 20, we want it to be up here, and you can see that as we do this, it's changing. And I go to frame 40 and I move it down here. But what's happening is you can see it's still moving on the x-axis. That's because we haven't activated keyframes for our y-axis. Okay, so I'm going to go back to frame 10 and I'm going to activate keyframes by hitting set key. Now we've got x and y here in our curve editor. Now I can go and you can see the line's been activated here. And you can see this line is showing us the path that the colour wheel is going to take. So now I'm just making a bit of a bounce. Okay, and I'll play this, and now you can see the path that our object is taking. And if I want, I can just select one axis at a time. So click on the Y, click on the X, and it's going to show us the different paths. Now let's say that we want to adjust the position at this point. Let's say that we don't want our colour wheel to go any higher than this X, this little cross here. Well, we can do that one of two ways. We can go here to 20 and we can adjust it manually, but you can see if I do that, I'm at risk of moving it left and right. I could also adjust it manually in here, but another way of doing it is just to go into our Y value here, and I'm going to select the point. You can see there's a point at each keyframe. I can just select it, and now I can move it. Now, when I move this point, the first direction that I take, it'll be locked to that axis. So if I move down straight away, it's automatically going to lock to that axis. So you see, if I move down now, you can see I'm moving my mouse right out here and it's not shifting off that axis. That's because the first movement I made was the up and down movement. So if I move it down so it's in line with that cross, I'm pretty happy with that. Now I could also move it left and right by making that my first movement. If I want to override that locking mechanism, I can hold down the command key and then I can move it freely. Another way of altering the value of these keyframe points is just by clicking on them, and you can see that a number appears. If I double click on that number, I can then enter the value manually. So let's say instead of dragging this point up here, I want to set it manually, so I want to set it to say 20. I can just click on the point to display the Y and X axis, and I'm going to set the Y axis. I'm going to click on the Y number here, and I'm going to set the value here to 40. Okay, so that's another way you can do it. Another way of modifying curves inside Nuke is to manually draw them. So let's say that we want to have this go up and down really erratically and make it look quite random. Well, instead of putting in lots and lots of keyframes and trying to do that, we can hold down the Command, Option and Shift key, or Control, Alt and Shift, and I can draw by left clicking while holding down those buttons. And you can see now that I've manually drawn those keyframes in. I can then play and watch our animation. And of course I could go back and alter any of those keyframes however I wanted. You can also make changes to keyframes while it's playing and then see them update. But of course that does use a bit more computer power. That's really the basics of the curve editor. There are a few other features like importing and exporting ASCIIs and using adding expressions down here, but for the purpose of this course that's pretty advanced compositing stuff, and we're not going to be really using that. That's only going to add more time and really add a bit of confusion, but of course if you want to learn those, you can find those in the Nuke manual. So next we'll move on to the dope sheet and how we use that.